And yeah, so I just want to welcome everyone here. Thanks for attending the iMoot, and just want to give a special welcome to Michael de Raadt. Michael works for the Moodle headquarters, but tends to be all over the world these days. But I'm sure he'll tell you about that. But his presentation right now, Myths in Your Moodle. So thank you, Michael, for giving over your time, and all yours.
Thank you, Shane, and hello, everyone. I suspect our audience might build up a bit more as we go along. That's what happened earlier. This is a repeat, so you get the benefit of not being the guinea pigs, and all the wrinkles are ironed out at this stage. So it's wonderful. Before I get into the content, I want to ask everyone to complete this survey, and it's directly relevant to this presentation. It's accessible from the course that you came in through to get in here, but if not, you want to jump to this bit.ly shortened URL and give it a go, and I will give everyone a bit of a minute to do that while I sort of introduce myself. So we won't get into the heavy stuff yet. While people are doing that. So just an introduction about myself. I'm not quite as avant-garde or man about town as Shane might make me out to be, but I have been a bit over the world recently. We were in Holland for about 3 months, just basically living there and working there until they kicked me out of the country. I've got a lot of family there. My parents come from the Netherlands, and that picture of us top left, you can see that we were in Alkmaar at the time. Yeah, I'm a pretty reasonable, normal person most of the time. I was an academic before I came to work at Moodle HQ. I have a PhD which relates to education and computing. And I love going for a good hike or a bushwalk and spending time with the family. So that's me. My job, I'm now the research director, which is quite a grand sounding title. I'm basically directing myself. And what do? I give a lot of presentations like this, so you can see me sort of using hand gestures and things like that a lot. I read papers in various journals and try and keep up with some conferences and so on, and try and share ideas that I think would be of use to the Moodle community. So when someone publishes something about Moodle, a bit of dissemination and try and promote some discussion. We've got a forum on Moodle.org for discussing research things. There's also a Twitter account which is Moodle Research, and if you're interested in receiving information which is relevant to Moodle and of a mature nature, educational technology research and things like that, that's sort of my professional sort of Twitter account, and I don't publish too much rubbish there, so it's worth following if you're interested. If you want to badmouth me or tweet about one of my presentations, my Twitter handle is Salvatore, so you can abuse me on that one, no worries. Moodle Moots is probably one of the biggest chunks of my work, and I've been basically in the last few months busy organising the 2 Moodle Moots that are happening around the world, one in Australia in July and one in the US in August. And the Australian one is shaping up to be really good. We've got a lot of great presentations lined up, and we're starting to approve those and get them into the schedule now. We had a great response to that, and I think that's indicative of how the conference itself will go. It's probably going to be a bit of a surge over previous years. The Moodle Moot in the US will be the first national US Moodle Moot. There have been a number of regional Moodle Moots, and I say that sort of in air quotes because regional, because they have drawn in from all over the country, but this will be the first full US national Moodle Moot, and we're hoping to make it a good one. Early indications say that it will probably be the biggest Moodle Moot that we've seen so far. So that'll be an interesting thing to get to. All right, how did we go in the survey? Let's have a quick look at what's going on in the survey. If I can make this work without crashing out, I'd be really pleased. Okay, so you should be able to see a region of my screen now. I'll just refresh the results. So we jumped up a couple of results there. We now have 39 results to our 10 questions. Hang on, I'll start sharing that. Hopefully you can see that now. Good. And there were just a series of questions. Some of them are related to education. Some of them are very loosely related. And I'll just go through them. We'll have a look at the results, and we can sort of talk about these a little later on as we go through my presentation. So the first one is drinking less than 6 to 8 glasses of water a day can cause your brain to shrink. And not many people think that that's true. We mostly use 10% of our brain. Well, a majority of people believe that that's true. That hasn't gone too far since this morning, so that seems to be a slight majority there. Individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style. Seems to be about 2/3 to 1/3 there, and so 2/3 for that. Digital native students are more tech savvy than their digital immigrant teachers. I think the people who agree with that have had a bit of a surge. So they're pulling back in. They've got almost 1/3 of the vote, but still 2/3 disagree with that. MOOCs will replace current teaching practices. Not too many people agreeing with that, but I kind of made that a bit too much of a distinct choice, I think. I should have softened that up a bit. Problem-based learning is more effective than transmission models. Seems to be a clear majority there agreeing with that. Learning analytics are a game changer. We've got a good majority there agreeing with that. And then I sort of threw in a few, they're not jokes, but just random things. Humans are responsible for global warming. Well, that's surged. The naysayers there. Well, I think if there's, it's lucky this is anonymous, because I'm sure there's some scientists out there that are waiting to drag those people out and shoot them or something. Stephen Hawking is a robot. Aliens built the pyramids, so let's not take this all too seriously. Okay, back to the presentation. Okay, myths. What do I mean when I say myths? What am I talking about? Well, I'm not talking about mythology of, you know, ancient sort of history or anything like that. I'm talking about ideas that have been propagated without too much evidence behind them, and they've become popularized to the point where people are starting to believe that they're true. And today I'm going to go through a number of ideas and challenge them to see whether there's evidence in research and in the research literature that supports them or not, and then, you know, to try and say, well, if it's not supported, what should we do instead? So I don't want to seem like a big naysayer or a negative person, because I think I'm going to disagree with a lot of people today, but hopefully we'll, you know, get some benefit out of this whole experience together. All right. Starting off with the first one, drinking less than 6 to 8 glasses of water a day can cause the brain to shrink. Well, the reason why I put this question in there is because it was raised as part of a study by Howard Jones and a few other people. It was published last year, and they were looking at educators. So these figures that I show there, they did a survey in 5 countries and asked educators in those countries to answer these questions, much like the way I've done it in the survey today. And so you can see there that there was varying responses, usually pretty low, so there wasn't a huge agreement with that particular statement. It turns out that this is one of those things that's it's sort of partly true. It's got a grain of truth to it. We do need to stay hydrated to be healthy, and our brain as well is you know, prone to dehydration. So we do want to stay, drink enough so that we can think clearly and go throughout our day. But that particular quantity, 6 to 8 glasses of water a day, is not really necessary, and how it was derived, people haven't been able to figure out how that became the widely promoted figure that people are advocating. So it's not really true. To the point where I was at a conference in Malaysia a couple of weeks ago, and I was handed, a free bottle of water in a nice, gift. Here's some bottled water for you to drink, and on the side it said, have you had your 8 glasses of water today? And I sort of thought, I think the bottled water industry might have something to gain from this idea. Anyway, moving on. We mostly use 10% of our brain, and according to the survey, there was a majority of respondents agreed with that particular statement. And the same paper that I was talking about earlier had this same question in there, and you can see around the world there was, sort of between 50 and 60% agreement with that particular statement, which is quite similar to the response that we got in the survey that we just looked at. It turns out that that's definitely not true. It is popularized in fiction and so on, and the origins are thought to come from experiments, or not experiments, but studies of people who'd had brain damage, so they'd lost part of their brain, and then they were, adjusting to life and so on. But we do in fact use all of our brain, and if you talk to a neurologist, they'll probably tell you that. If you lose part of your brain, do lose function in your body, and if we only use 10% of our brain, would be less than a vegetable. So it's interesting to see that that's an example of something that gets repeated so many times, because I guess it makes a good story. We're all sort of hoping that there's some mysterious potential within us, perhaps. Anyway, moving on. Here's one that's a lot more associated with what we've been talking about in this particular conference, and is perhaps even a sort of more controversial idea. Individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style. Now, according to the people who responded to that survey, here it was about 2/3 agreement and 1/3 disagreement with that. The same study that I mentioned earlier, there was quite a lot more agreement. There was getting close to 100% agreement in some instances there. Yes, but as Joshua is suggesting in the chat, there's a lot of research against this particular idea, and I'm going to go through some quotes. So this is in that paper, the same paper that I've been mentioning, that had these surveys, the worldwide surveys in them. There's a quote from that. Reviews of educational literature and controlled laboratory studies fail to support this approach to teaching, which is the use of learning styles. In other words, typically lacking evidence in most of the studies that are promoting this notion of learning styles. Another study, the present results suggest that people's intuitions about learning styles may be incorrectly attributed. In other words, we want it to be true. Why would we want it to be true? I think it comes down to, and this was mentioned in another paper, we have this desire to simplify the world. In education, we like to be able to put people in boxes, to categorize them, because then we can deal with them more easily. We can say, well, Billy's a visual learner, therefore I can supply him with more resources that are visually oriented. In a world like that, it makes us seem more competent and more effective as teachers. So, being able to sort of suss out everyone's learning styles would be an advantage, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. The literature fails to provide adequate support for applying learning style assignments in school settings, and that's from Pasha in 2009. So in other words, when these ideas are in fact put into actual practice, when you take them and then try and see if it has benefited students, it doesn't seem to help. So, all right. So there are a lot of learning styles inventories. This is a sample from a particular collection where they were comparing these, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of learning style inventories. Some have been, there've been attempts to validate some of them. There have also been some created which seem no less useful than a personality quiz in a glossy magazine. And what it's generated is a lot of educationalist theory that doesn't necessarily have any evidence to back it up. There are educationalists going head to head with psychologists at the moment, and I think the argument has swayed against the educationalists with evidence coming from psychologists saying that this is mostly untrue. So let's move on and say, all right, well, if we're not going to place our trust in learning styles as educationalists, as teachers, let's say, what can we do instead? I think the general recommendation is to consider what you're teaching and design content appropriate forms of instruction. So you don't necessarily have to target every sort of learning style. You need to consider what you're teaching and then to provide an appropriate presentation of that. It does help to present things in multiple ways, and that can be in multiple modalities, because one will reinforce the other and provide an alternate explanation. So that's still advisable. But some people, when they start using a particular learning style inventory, then find that they have to cater for all of these learning styles in every single piece of resource that they produce, and it ends up being, not as successful. I mean, I've done my own studies involving learning styles, and I found it was a bit inconsistent. So you couldn't really predict what students would benefit from anyway. So my advice would be to save your time and invest it in the best resources you can produce. Okay, just some questions looking through. I'm just reading through the chat now, see if there's anything. Mostly there's just, okay, yes, definitely mixing it up does help, but yeah, the variety is good. Okay. All right, moving on. Digital native students are more tech savvy than their digital immigrant teachers. Again, I think this comes down to whether people like to sort of simplify the world, and we tend to do this with generations of people, Gen X and so on, Gen Y. There's all sorts of naming conventions that go through. Is this, though, this notion that students coming into education now are more tech savvy than their teachers? Well, I challenge this in a number of ways. There was a certain amount of disagreement to this. So 2/3 of people thought this was untrue in our survey, and 1/3 thought it was true. Let's have a look at what the literature says. Teachers' age and technology skill could not be identified as the cause of the disconnect between students' use of technology. And so, in other words, Wang et al. Could not find a difference between various sort of generations or ages in their study. And another study, recent research has shown flaws in the argument that there is an identifiable generation or even a single type of highly adept technology user. In other words, the generation skill is inconsistent. You've got some people in each generation who are more tech savvy and others who are less so. Well, what do you do about that? Okay. I think as educators, again, what we need to do to respond to this is provide appropriate teacher training. Appropriate means at the level that they need it, because obviously we've got a variety of users, some who are going to be tech savvy and some who are not. Also, I think we can be a bit more confident. There's a certain amount of fear mongering and panic almost in the teaching world that things are moving too fast and we're never going to be able to deal with these students, and someday they'll prove themselves that they don't need us anymore, or something like that. I'm just making things up, but it is a sense of dread in there as well. I think we can avoid that. We can be a bit more confident and say, look, we as teachers are spending a lot of time around teaching technology. Students, younger people, if we're going to categorize all students as younger, do spend a lot of time with technology, but it's not necessarily the stuff that's relevant to teaching. So I think we can still be confident there. All right, just going to the chat there. All right. So we've got some people claiming to be in a particular category there. So I think I was on the cusp, if anyone wants to know. My grandmother knows more about computers than 2/3 of my students. Good on her. Another thing I would say that is an argument against this is the varying ages that we see in students, particularly in online education. People are reinventing their lives and undertaking education more often. How can you categorize them all as young, trendy digital immigrants? Anyway, moving on. All right, MOOCs. There was a few papers, MOOCs, a wave is coming, and then it was a tsunami is coming. Reminded me of this wonderful artwork from Japan, very iconic. I've actually seen this in person, painted in Kyoto inside a building. Anyway, MOOCs will replace current teaching practices. Now, in the survey, only 2 people agreed with that, and that might have been because it was quite a bold statement. I didn't really, leave much room for grey there. Is that a justifiable statement? Let's have a look at some studies and what they've said. So there's actually a website that's collecting together. I've tagged it as Jordan 2013, but it's not an academic paper. It's a study of various MOOCs around the world that's done online, and it continually updates. But they're looking particularly at things like completion rate. And here's a statement from the site. The highest completion rate achieved was 19.2%, and the majority of MOOCs had completion rates less than 10%. I don't think things have changed too much in the last few years since I was an actual academic. If I handed in a completion rate of 10%, I'd get fired. And I assume it's still the same today. So at the moment, at least, MOOCs are not retaining students at an acceptable level. It's interesting that this kind of gets, justified by the casualness of MOOCs. And I wonder if that is really something that is a problem or not. Anyway, moving on. I should probably preface this with the source, because it's from the US Campus Computing Survey. These are CIOs, or people in charge of IT in colleges and universities in the US, and it's quite a broad and extensive survey of those people. But one of the findings from last year's survey was that less than 38% of respondents agree that MOOCs offer a viable model for the effective delivery of online instruction, which was down from 53% the year before. And so there's sort of a bit of a downward trend in the confidence that people have, particularly in a tertiary level, for it to be an equivalent or an effective delivery mode for tertiary. I would say that that's it's sort of saying, again, it's going back to my initial statement that they would replace traditional modes of teaching, whereas it's not really how MOOCs are being used. Well, from that same study, they claimed that MOOC mania is over. So this fascination that people have with MOOCs as something that's taking over the wave of change is sort of trending downwards. But I would say that, yeah, MOOCs will have a place in online education when used appropriately. I think there is still a place for MOOCs. Moodle is involved in that. Moodle itself has been used in some of the earliest MOOCs and is still being used around the world as a MOOC platform. It's not as synonymous with MOOCs simply because it's not solely devoted to that sort of way of teaching. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that is going to continue, both with Moodle and otherwise. My experiences looking at this, certainly at the tertiary level, have been that universities are offering incentive courses, teasers, to get students in, to get their loyalty, and then to attract them into programs. But there aren't too many that are throwing the whole lot of their courses into MOOCs at this stage, from what I can tell. All right, going to the chat. So people are doing some agreement. It's always nice to see agreement. Still some talk about digital immigrants. So people are, okay. All right, sorry, not much on that at the moment. Yep, yeah, I think, yeah, Josh is right. We need to make a distinction, I think, between the applications of MOOC teaching and traditional online teaching, if you want to call it traditional. To be honest, in my mind, there's not too much to distinguish good teaching, whether it's in a MOOC or online. I guess, though, the nature of the support, assessment, and the freedom is what it is the main distinction there. I think universities will, as places who hold the authority to assess people, will continue to try and maintain that in many years to come. Okay, here's an interesting one, and I hope it will challenge people a fair bit here. Problem-based learning is more effective than transmission models, and in terms of the agreement to this online, it was sort of 80% agreement with this particular statement from the people who filled in my survey. Let's have a look at some evidence. Dick Clark has been looking at this idea for a number of years now, and they've studied this in quite, some very interesting papers that have come out of this. Requiring students to discover what they need to learn results in 45% less learning than demonstrating how to solve problems. The most vulnerable students are harmed the most. So I think that this has to do with people misusing problem-based learning, and we'll move on from there. So yeah, just in brief, it's less effective and harms strugglers. This is one that I refer to a lot. It was something that I discovered in my PhD research a few years back. 1 minute of explicit training can be more effective than months of implicit training. So basically telling someone some information explicitly is going to be more effective than asking them to implicitly figure that out for themselves. There was a really interesting study around that particular paper, and I recommend that you read it. But ultimately, the explicit instruction is always going to be more effective. So where this, I think, becomes a matter of distinction is that people often confuse constructivism with unguided learning. There is this idea that if you allow students to discover something for themselves, then they will benefit from that. Constructivism is about encouraging the construction of a learning model within the student's mind. It's allowing them to build that up, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you do it, in a completely hands-off way. You need to start that model up with scaffolding. You need to provide them with the fundamental understanding that they can reinforce to get a clear understanding. And I think often people will jump straight to some sort of implicit instruction when they need to start off with the explicit stuff first and then allow students to go further and explore and extend that understanding. Certainly, this is something that I have seen people try. We're using problem-based learning in our first year engineering course, and you kind of go, is that really a smart idea? They're doing it because they've heard that problem-based learning is good, so they're just applying it to a fundamental sort of learning situation, and it's often questionable there. But I don't want to sort of deny that allowing students to solve problems will reinforce their learning. It's just that I think that people have to do it a certain way around. Looking at the quotes, so some people hate problem-based learning, okay. Yes, level of scaffolding first. Okay, well, there's a lot of closet PBL haters here. That's at last, we're free. Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So yeah, it does raise questions about how educators are trained, and if we've got educationalists endorsing this approach and training educators, who's going to stop them from, from endorsing this point of view that PBL is better than everything else? I'm not sure. I mean, who questions these sorts of things? All right, moving on. Socioeconomic factors are the best predictor of success. In other words, if you've got a student who comes from a troubled background or from a rough life or something like that, they're less likely to succeed than someone who comes from some sort of better background, gifted student scholarships, things like that, past experience even. Is that true? John Whitmer, who was involved in the Moodle community up until recently, did his PhD research around analytics, in particular looking for predictors there. And from his PhD you can read that LMS use is a better predictor of potential academic achievement than demographic factors and even previous grades. So it's all about the clicks, people. So involvement, participation is from this study the best predictor of an outcome. Well, with that in mind, as educators, what can we do to encourage that and to hopefully improve retention and success for our students? Using regular assessment and activities to encourage involvement, so weekly quizzes, get those incentives in there, or some sort of completion goal for them, so that they're drawn back to it on a regular basis, and then actively monitor the students' involvement. And when there are students that are uninvolved, well, you need to chase them. We can't just rely on them being good students coming into the course from the start. So going to the chat and looking at what people are talking about. Yeah, Moodle courses often suck. I would agree with that. And I would say that there's this mentality that's being built up in the online space that we need to try and avoid things like repetition and so on. We want to have these clean courses that aren't too demanding on our students' time, whereas really what our students are needing is a lot of reinforcement, a lot of repetition, and a lot of explicit instruction in different ways. So are we fooling ourselves that in online we can get away with these sorts of things, whereas it's not necessarily true? Okay. Involvement is the key. You can't teach someone who isn't there. Yes. All right. Okay. Getting closer to the end now. Learning analytics, very topical at the moment. So is it true that learning analytics will be a game changer? Well, let's take a step back a bit. There was each year there, well, not each year, but on a regular basis, there is a Horizon report published from different regions around the world, including Australia. And they're looking at future trends in education, trying to predict what things will have an impact in the next few years. The Australian Horizon report from 2012 had a prediction that learning analytics would be here in 1 year or less. A year later, they had to have a look around and go, well, we're not using learning analytics yet, but surely it's still only 1 year or less away. And then in 2014, they went, well, maybe we're asking the wrong question and maybe we need to delay this a bit. So they've pushed it back 2 to 3 years. And it's an interesting study there that came up, Beer et al. We're sort of trying to figure out why are people so keen to have this? Well, you know, is it something that should be here now or not? So it's not as close as we think. Trust me, we're working on it, but yes. People are still asking questions like what, how, and why. In other words, we've got to have the questions first before we can give people the answers, and maybe that's what we're doing wrong. We're putting the cart before the horse, expecting, you know, we've got this data, surely we can do something with it, but, you know, no one's asking, you know, what do we want to find out from it? All right. Students' mastery orientation decreased and students' exposure to displays of academic performance negatively predicts this change. All right, this is from a study where they showed relative performance data to students in a course, and what the impact was that poorly performing students, as it says there, just got worse. They gave up. They got told you're not doing very well. They just threw up their hands and gave up. So we need to be very careful how we use these ideas. If we're going to sort of try and encourage students along, maybe the raw data and just presenting it to them isn't the right thing. Okay. All right, so what do we need to do in relation to analytics? Well, we still need to innovate the analytics tools that will benefit students, and students are the ultimate sort of beneficiaries of this, whether we're talking about supporting teachers to teach students better or supporting institutions to support students better. It's the students are the key here, and we need to see the evidence that backs this up. If we start using these tools, you know, do we see an improvement in student outcomes? There are some things going on at the moment to look at risk prediction. So there is a fair bit of analysis going on to sort of try and see, well, if a student's behavior is like this, are they more or less likely to succeed, and can we make recommendations to channel them into a more successful behavior? So that's where a lot of focus is going at the moment. But as I said, we need to present that information to students quite carefully. All right, what have we got on the chat? Some amusement, that's always good. If you don't know the question, we just sort of say 42, okay. I've seen a lot of teachers in classroom full of students who aren't really there. My body often turned up to classes without my brain or interest coming with it, okay. Cool. All right, now these last few I have nothing to do with education. I just threw them in there because they were kind of a fun question to ask. And my commendation to the people who were brave enough to disagree with this, and it's one of those things that's become politically correct to agree with, and whether or not, I'm not even going to try and tell you my opinion there. Stephen Hawking, well, I don't know him very personally, but that was just a bit of a joke. And, well, who knows, maybe the aliens did build the pyramids. Okay. All right, I've got a few references there, and some of these I have also added to the course, which I put there for educational purposes in the knowledge that it is a closed and invitation-only event, so you can access those from there. Certainly some good reading there for you. And I will let Shane manage questions from here on.
Hey, Michael, you're welcome to manage questions if anyone has any.
Okay. Well, I thought it was your job.
No, I'll just push the recording button and then stop it.
Okay. Well, it's a very important button to press. All right. So does anyone have any general questions about this? Any of the topics that have come up? Has anyone, here's a question for you then. Has anyone been challenged today and is perhaps reconsidering what they do? People agreeing with that? I gave this presentation in the Moodle Moot in Ireland, and I gave it as a picture kucha, which is like very rapid, 20 slides for 20 seconds each. And at the end of it, I saw people with their mouths hanging open as if, did he actually just say that? It was quite an interesting response. Anyway, it was fun too. So. Okay. Yeah, we've always got to reevaluate what we do. Let's do it for the right reasons. Next dot. Okay. I have a better understanding of educational process behind educating. Thanks, Ellen. Yeah. Okay. Well, your homework, Lindy, if you suggest that you need some, is to read the papers that I've put up on there. Some of them are actually quite fun to read. I know academic papers can be sometimes very dry, but some of them are really quite nice. Oh, what have we got? Got a bit of a, all right, a bit of a cartoon in there as well. Thanks, Shane. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming along and attending. I know that this has been not the best time slot for everybody around the world, but I'm glad that I've done my bit for iMoot now. 2 presentations. My slate is clean. I can try and attend a few more and have a nice weekend as well. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Just jumping in and just to say thank you, Michael, for that presentation, and obviously generating a lot in the chat as well. Some really good questions. So, but really appreciate your time once again. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.